Greetings, fellow Trekkies and Trekkers, and happy Star Trek Day! Woohoo! Alright, so our look at Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 4 now continues on with the episode Homefront. Lieutenant Commander Dax and Captain Sisko are looking at one of the promenade viewports at the wormhole as it opens and then promptly closes without any ships emerging. Dax explains that this is the seventh time this has happened within the last 2 hours, and each time there are no unusual sensor readings or any sign of ships leaving the wormhole. She mentions that the Bajorans are seeing the unusual phenomenon as a sign from the prophets, and Sisko, only half jokingly, asks why the prophets would send a sign without telling him. Dax rejoins that perhaps they are having trouble recognizing their emissary with his new beard. The two walk on and as they reach the railing, they notice Odo emerging from airlock on the lower deck looking slightly aggravated. But before Sisko could find out why Dax finds this so funny, the conversation is interrupted by a call message from Worf. A pretty one message from Starfleet Security has just arrived. In the meantime, Odo makes his way to Quark's bar, and after asking if Dax is there, accuses him of probably being cahoots with her and shifting all the furniture in his quarters while he was regenerating. Quark doesn't see what the big deal is. Odo explains that all his belongings are carefully and painstakingly arranged, and that Dax, while knowing this, has broken in for the fourth time in the past year to move everything out of alignment. Amused, Quark asks Odo to say hello to Dax for him when Odo is called away to Ops 2. As Odo arrives at Ops, the other members of the senior staff are discussing the message. Worf explains that the message contains a recording made at a conference between diplomatic representatives from the Federation and the Romulan Star Empire on Earth. The video is played and shows an explosion caused by a bomb of unknown origin. Worf commands the computer to play the video again, but to enlarge a certain section and show playback to 1/10 of normal speed. This time, a vase can be seen to shimmer in the same way that changelings do in their liquid form. The remains of a changeling were not found in the wreckage, however, which probably means it escaped without injury. Sisko cannot believe it has come to this, but it would seem that the changelings have finally reached Earth. Dun dun dun. Odo and Dax are in Odo's quarters, with her repairing the damage that she had caused. They discuss the trip to Earth, which Sisko and Odo will make aboard the USS Lakota. Odo doesn't seem to think he will be able to tell Starfleet any more about its race than he has done in his previous official reports, but Dax insists that if there are really changelings on Earth, then Starfleet is going to need as much help as it can get. Sisko's in his quarters talking with his father, Joseph Sisko, on his desktop monitor. They're discussing Sisko's, the family restaurant in New Orleans. Joseph doesn't seem to understand that Ben isn't on a pleasure trip, and Ben has to explain that he will probably be spending most of his time with Starfleet headquarters. After a short discussion, Jake comes into the room. Jake asks if his father told Joseph that they won't be staying with him. Ben admits he hasn't told him just yet, and Jake complains that if he has to stay with his grandfather, he'll have to work in the kitchen all day peeling potatoes. Ben tells Jake he is old enough now not to worry about having to peel potatoes all day. His grandfather would probably want him to serve the guests instead, much to Jake's dismay. Back in Quark's, Chief Miles O'Brien and Dr. Julian Bashir leave the holosuite, entering the bar dressed in World War II-style flying jackets and caps. Bashir orders scotch and O'Brien orders a pint of beer. They seem to be discussing the Battle of Britain. Quark asks why they're in the bar when the Germans are attacking, but Bashir explains that they have to be. It's part of a ritual to remember fallen comrades. "To Clive!" shouts O'Brien, after which they both down their drinks in one gulp and are about to smash empty glasses on the bar. But Quark reminds them that they've already discussed the smashing of empty glasses. At any rate, Quark thinks they are taking it all a bit too seriously. After all, Clive was only a holosuite figure. O'Brien tries to explain to Quark that there is more to it than just Clive. It is about Earth. O'Brien says that when a place you love is in danger and you try to take some action to help make that place safer but fail, it can be very frustrating. Quark says he knows exactly what O'Brien means and tells his own story about how he was serving as a cook aboard a Ferengi fighter hundreds of light years away from home as a terrible currency crisis hit Ferengar. He says he couldn't begin to explain how bad he felt to know that runaway inflation rapid currency devaluation was rampaging across his planet like a brush fire. He's also gotten over it to this day when he thinks about how powerless he was to save his accounts. O'Brien quips that, despite Quark's little story, he doesn't feel any better. Odo walks past the bar and Bashir and O'Brien leave and join him. They both discuss the Battle of Britain. Bashir offers Odo the place of Clive, but Odo isn't so sure he wants it, for obvious reasons. O'Brien asks Odo to visit his family in Dublin, and make sure they are all fine. Clearly, recent events have set him and many other people slightly on edge. Odo offers to look up anyone for Bashir, but the doctor plays he doesn't have anyone there for him. Bashir says he wishes he could be going along for the right tune. Odo agrees he could do it with the company, as he has doubts that a change will be very welcome on Earth. O'Brien tries to comfort Odo by reassuring him that people can't hold him responsible for the acts of his people. Odo remains unconvinced, however, and departs for the Lakota. Back in Ops, O'Brien reports that the Lakota has departed the station and has entered Warp. Worf and Major Karen Reese discuss the wormhole, which has now returned to normal, having last opened 12 hours previously. Kira is somewhat disappointed, as she hoped it was the work of the prophets, and that they have finally decided to show themselves as Bajoran people. Worf comments that he prefers the Klingon belief system. Kira asks if the Klingon gods are just as mysterious and scripted as those of Bajorans. Of course, the Klingons don't have any gods. They were executed by Klingon warriors over 1,000 years ago because they brought more trouble than it was worth. O'Brien and Kira agree that nobody can understand the Klingons, but, as O'Brien says, that's the way they like it. Later, on Earth at Starfleet headquarters in San Francisco, Sisko and Odo meet Admiral Layden and Commander Benteen in front of the building. Out of a short series of introductions, Sisko reveals that it was Admiral Layden, his former commanding officer on the USS Okinawa, who recommended him for the post on Deep Space Nine. The theme of the conversation changes to Odo and the Changelings. The Admiral hopes that, with the help of Sisko and Odo, the task of finding the Changelings on Earth will be easier. Sisko doubts that he and Odo were brought all the way to Earth merely to discuss the situation. Layden confirms this. Because of Sisko's detailed knowledge of and experiences with the Founders, Layden names him as the acting chief of Starfleet security on Earth, effective immediately. As Joseph Sisko, serving the customers, as one can only assume he usually does, cheerfully walking around the restaurant talking aloud to all his customers. He suggests that nobody should even need to look at the dessert menu because if they miss out on his bread pudding souffle, they will regret it. His son Benjamin Sisko enters and agrees with his dad, telling customers that his father knows his bread pudding souffle. Jake also appears, and a short discussion about Jake growing up and the history of the alligator hanging in the restaurant follows. Eventually, the three sit at a table and discuss the current situation. Odo was not present, having decided, according to Ben, it was wiser to stay in Starfleet headquarters under the circumstances. Joseph can understand why, after all. He hasn't seen people so nervous since the last Borg incident. Anyway, he finds anyone who doesn't eat inherently suspect. Joseph recognizes, however, that Starfleet must be taking the whole situation very seriously, especially bringing Ben all the way from Deep Space Nine to deal with it. As the three talk, Ben knows his father saw his weight and becomes concerned. Joseph sternly tells his son and grandson that he feels fine. Shortly after, Cadet Nog enters the restaurant. It turns out he eats at Sisko's regularly because it was one of the only places on Earth where he can get his tube grubs live. Joseph would, of course, add them to his menu, but his human customers would expect them cooked and with a sauce. Nog finds the idea somewhat confusing, as the grubs should be alive and moving as they go down. The idea completely puts Ben off his food. Sometime later, as the restaurant is closing, Nog and Jake sit down at a table where Nog explains that he is having problems at the academy, which he at first put down to him being a Ferengi. He later realized that that wasn't the reason many students have the same problem, especially where Red Squad is concerned. Red Squad members receive special treatment on extra lessons and excursions that the other students don't. Jake assures Nog as soon as his fellow cadets get to know him, everything will begin to work out. Admiral and Ben Sisko meet with Jarish Eno, the president of the Federation in Paris. The Eiffel Tower is clearly visible through the window. Sisko has a number of recommendations for the president regarding the Dominion infiltration and how it can be combated. The president is not eager to turn Earth into a military outpost where everybody must submit to blood tests and phaser examinations of every room must be carried out. He quickly changes his mind, however, when it turns out that the attaché case Sisko is carrying was, in fact, Odo. Odo points out that Sisko and Layden were allowed to see the president without having to undergo a blood test or having their personnel properly checked. If he had been a founder, he would have killed the president or simply taken his place. The president begrudgingly agrees to allow the new security procedures, saying that it's taken a lot of hard work to change Earth into the peaceful world that it is now, and that he doesn't wish for this paradise to be destroyed. We're not looking to destroy a paradise, says Sisko. We're looking to save it. Sisko and Benteen are going over the new security arrangements using Odo as a test subject. As Sisko found out previously, Changelings can easily be located by sweeping an area with a low energy level phaser beam. A small device mounted above the door of a room can be used to send out a wide phaser beam and scan the room systematically. When the beam comes into contact with a hidden changeling, they are injured and forced to return to their normal form. A beam strength of 3.4 should be enough to stun any changelings, according to Bentine, but Nor recommends a strength of 3.5 just to be on the safe side. Following the success of the test run, Cisco orders the devices to be installed in every room in Starfleet headquarters as well as the orbital facilities. As Bentine leaves, she thanks Cisco for managing to convince the President that such measures were necessary. I think she would have thanked me as well, says Odo after she leaves. I'm the one who got shot 13 times today. As Nog enters the room, he has to speak to Cisco alone, and Odo departs. Cisco and Nog discuss the problems he has been having at the Academy. Cisco says they both knew it would take time for Nog to get used to the Academy, and vice versa. Nog wants to become a member of Red Squad and asks Cisco for his help. A Red Squad didn't exist when Cisco was at the Academy, and Nog admits that it is very new, but he has the grades he needs to join the squad. He just needs a recommendation of a high-ranking officer. Cisco says when he gets a chance, he will see what he can do. He then somewhat abruptly dismisses Nog from the room. Back at Cisco's, the restaurant seems to be closed and Joseph is preparing things for it when it opens later in the day. Ben tells his father he's been very busy, but that he can't talk about it. His father replies, "Think the Admiral could spare you for a few days, for a few hours a day to visit your father?" Joseph seems to be somewhat disappointed as Jake is away at the Pennington Writing School in New Zealand, and Ben is constantly busy at Starfleet headquarters. It's almost as if they were not there at all. Ben counters that his father is more than welcome to visit him and his son on Deep Space Nine, but Joseph seems to be very attached to his restaurant and couldn't possibly leave. They discuss Joseph's declining health, but the topic changes to business again. Ben says it's a free hour and they agreed to go walk together in Audubon Park. Back at Starfleet headquarters at San Francisco, a seagull flies from the sky and lands on a rock before transforming into Odo. Bentine and Admiral Layden approach just in time to see him finish the transformation. He explains he has just flown around San Francisco and is very impressed. Now the architecture is not as ancient as that on Bajor, but is still impressive. Bentine wonders how many other changelings are up there in the skies. Odo says that if all the changelings were interested in doing, Odo says that if that was all the changelings were interested in doing, we wouldn't have to be so worried. Layden, however, rather rudely comments that the other changelings have better things to do than imitate birds. After all, the other changelings are much better than Odo at imitating humans. Bentine, trying to ease the tension a little, says she found the seagull very convincing, but Odo wasn't so sure the other seagulls were convinced. Layden suggests that Odo keep practicing until he succeeds in making the birds think he is one of them. Again, his tone is somewhat abrupt. Odo has picked up on all these signals, however. He offers the Admiral a compliment and holds his hand out in a shake hands gesture. The Admiral ignores this and walks away, but Odo catches hold of his arm and their hands fuse together as changelings do with a link. Layden is not who he appears to be. Layden Poster replies to this sarcastically with, "Well done, Odo," then pulls his arm free, transforms into a bird, and flies away. Sometime later, Odo, the real Admiral Layden, Cisco and Bentine are together in a room discussing the imposter. Odo says he knew it wasn't the real Layden because he felt the imposter was treating him somewhat aggressively. Cisco says, Odo was the first changeling to have harmed another, and it is therefore understandable that they have such feelings about him. Layden can understand why the changeling would have taken on his form, but, as Bentine agrees, Layden is a prime target. He has access to all the security protocols. The important thing is, however, that the new security measures don't go far enough to stop changelings from breaking into Starfleet headquarters. Layden knows, however, that the president won't allow tighter security. He's been a good peacetime president, but the situation could break out into war if drastic action isn't taken. The president is a long way from home, says Layden, and they couldn't expect him to be as concerned about the state of affairs on Earth as a human would be. The conversation is interrupted by an incoming message from Cisco. And Jake asks Ben to come back to the restaurant as soon as he can. Joseph has been arrested. As Ben arrives at Cisco's, he finds two Starfleet officers and his father arguing. The officers have tried to carry out blood tests on Jake and Joseph. They attempt to explain to Joseph that they're simply following the orders given to them that all family members of Starfleet personnel must have their blood checked regularly. No exceptions. Joseph can't believe such orders would ever have been given, and he finds it even harder to believe that his own son was the one who passed them. Even after Ben and Jake submit to the test, Joseph refuses, calling the officers vampires. Joseph and Ben argue, Initially about the procedures, but leads to Ben bring up his father's poor health. Joseph's not visited his doctor in 8 months. As the two's conversation becomes more heated, Ben pleads with his father to get help from his family as well as his doctor. Joseph argues that maintaining his health will take too much time away from his restaurant, and he's too old to manage both. During the two's progressively heated conversation, Joseph cuts his hand. He rushes over to the sink to wash the wound. Ben, without even thinking, examines the blood on the knife. Joseph is shocked, clearly disappointed and angry. That's exactly what the changelings wanted to happen. People are so scared that they are beginning to have doubts about their own family members. The blood test may not be all that infallible anyway. Joseph argues that if the changelings are all that clever, they'll find a way around the blood screening test, telling Ben that it's not a test that exists that someone smart enough can't get around. Suddenly, Joseph suffers a mild stroke, caused both by his arteriosclerosis and because he got so enraged and overexerted himself. Back in San Francisco, Odo and Cisco discuss Joseph's recent ill health, and Odo points out that when humans are supposed to do something that would be good for them, they often do the exact opposite. However, the thing which worries Cisco most is that he actually believed that his father was a changeling, which Odo claims to be a wise thing to assume. Of course, this is exactly what the founders wished to happen. Cisco tells Odo, "There are times I wish you never found your people," and hopes the constable understands. Odo tells Cisco that he not only understands, but he sometimes feels exactly the same way. Back at Cisco's, Joseph's back on his feet and going about his work as if nothing had happened, talking with his customers while serving them their food. Eventually, Joseph sits down for a moment and talks with Jake about Ben. He's worried that he's overworked and stressed. Before Jake can reply, the lights go in the restaurant. No one's quite sure what has happened. Jake looks out a window and says that the whole block is without power. Cisco, trapped in an office by the power outage, is trying to open the door as Odo and Merlin pry it open from the other side. Lynn explains that it looks like the whole global power grid on Earth has been knocked out, including the emergency backups with Starfleet headquarters. All the evidence points to sabotage, and the prime candidates are clearly the changelings. The power outage means that transporters, sensors, and every defense installation on the surface is inactive, which means that they're totally defenseless against a Dominion attack. "I'm not interested in excuses," says the president. He demands that the power relay system be restored as soon as possible. As he finishes his speech, Cisco, Odo, Layden, and 2 other officers beam into the office via the transporters on the Lakota. Cisco, in his post as Chief of Starfleet Security, recommends that the president call a state of emergency. With the exception of the Borg incident, it's been over 100 years since such a state was last called. Cisco explains that he has recently that the Dominion fleet is somewhere in the Alpha Quadrant, ready to launch an attack on the now defenseless Earth. Cisco continues to explain that, shortly before he and Odo left Deep Space Nine, the wormhole was repeatedly opening and closing, although no ships were detected traveling through it. It's more than possible, Odo continues, that the founders have salvaged cloaking devices from the Romulan Cardassian fleet that was destroyed at the Battle of the Omarian Nebula. As it's going to take a fair amount of time to get the power relay system back online, it could take days. The only way to defend Earth is by using transporters and the communication systems of the Lakota to mobilize Starfleet officers. The president still hesitant to agree to the suggestions. Dr. Cisco explains how brutal the Jem'Hadar can be in close combat and how they won't differentiate between soldiers and civilians. The president gives control of Earth's defense systems over to Cisco and Layden. At Cisco's, Jake goes out the window with his grandfather to see armed Federation troops beaming down into the streets, leaving them both startled that the situation has escalated so seriously. Dun dun dun. So now let's take a look at some trivia surrounding this episode. This episode takes place 1 month after Little Green Men. Joseph Cisco describes the method that the changelings could use to get around the blood tests. It's probable this technique has already been used, as General Martok gave a blood sample in the way of the warrior, despite the fact that, as revealed in Apocalypse Rising, he had been replaced by a changeling. The Klingon gods will later be mentioned again in You're Cordially Invited, and their destruction elaborated on. Ward describes the event as taking place a millennia ago, which supposedly has millennia as plural, which doesn't agree with the singular article. The warriors who slew the gods are later revealed to be the first Klingon man and woman. If we're up in a single millennium, that would imply that the Klingons believed that they were created that long ago. The Klingon Empire was founded in the 9th century, hence isn't likely, and would have probably meant multiple millennia. It's interesting to note that the Romans and the Tholians, who led since the Antwerp bombing, both signed non-aggression pacts with the Dominion in 2373 and called to arms. The Borg incident mentioned in this episode refers to the first invasion attempt of Earth by the Borg, which is shown in the TNG episodes Best of Both Worlds Parts 1 and 2. The Earth-Romulan War is alluded to when mentioning the struggle that led to the founding of the Federation. Michael Anthony Sakuda wrote in the Star Trek chronology, Homefront seemed to imply the Romulan Wars actually reached Earth. It's revealed in Winter Reigns that Odo was infected with the morphogenic virus by Section 31 during the events of this episode, and gives a star date for the day when Odo was in Starfleet Medical as stardate 49419. Susan Gibney, who plays Bentine, previously portrayed Dr. Leah Brahms in the Next Generation episodes Booby Trap and Galaxy's Child. This is the first time we see Sisko's in New Orleans, and the first time we see Brock Peters as Joseph Sisko. He previously played Admiral Cartwright in Star Trek IV The Voyage Home and Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country. Notably, after having played a traitorous admiral, he plays a man chafing under the draconian measures being forced by a traitorous admiral. This is the first time we see Sisko wearing a TNG uniform since the pilot Emissary. However, he's seen wear his usual uniform earlier in this episode. Jerish Inyo says, with the exception of the Borg incident, there hasn't been a state of emergency declared on Earth in a century. This could refer to the future incident in Star Trek The Motion Picture, was conjecturally said exactly a century before this episode. On the other hand, the Star Trek chronology speculates this to be a reference to the whale probes and inverted attack on Earth seen in Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, set some 86 years before this episode. Bringing all together in this episode are Rene Auberjonois, sorry I mispronounced that, Michael Dorn and Brock Peters, all of whom played supporting characters in the film Star Trek VI The Undiscovered Country. In addition, the Office of the Federation President, located in Paris, seen in that film, was also faithfully recreated here, with a bit of furniture relocation by the production crew. Jake Sisko suggested Nog that he might even join Red Squad when Nog expressed his worries about being accepted by his peers. Nog eventually does join Red Squad as a provisional officer with the rank of Lieutenant Commander in the 6th season episode Valiant. In the scene at Quark's, with O'Brien and Bashir, first from Hell Suite dressed as RAF pilots, the references to cabbage crates coming over the briny and praying to Snipe are from Monty Python's The Banter sketch. The health problems of Joseph Sisko are mentioned during this episode, referring back to the alternate when Benjamin Sisko mentions to Odo, "When my father became ill, I can remember how small and weak he looked lying there in bed. He'd been so strong, so independent. It always seemed to me there was nothing that he couldn't do. But in the end, I realized that there was nothing that he could do, nothing I could do to help him," implying that he may have passed away. However, in the script of Homefront, it's mentioned that several years earlier Joseph fought a debilitating battle against a severe illness, barely surviving. He's never gone back to full strength, but he's determined to live out the rest of his years with gusto, which seems to be a form of retcon to fit with this story. When Sisko and Odo are looking over the list of officers being transferred to Earth, Sisko reads off 5 names: Tanika, Orr, Moodus, McWatt, and Snowden. All of whom are characters from Catch-22. In the scene where O'Brien asks if Odo can visit his parents in Dublin, Odo asks Bashir if there was anyone he could look up for him, but Bashir almost immediately, and rather nervous, replies, no, that'll be fine. This is the ground for the story of Bashir's troubled relationship with his parents, and the secret of his genetic alteration, seen in the 5th season episode, Dr. Bashir, I presume. So overall, yeah, there's definitely a lot going on in this episode, and yeah, of course, it is part 1 of this is a to be continued types episode, so there's that. Anyway, so overall, I give Homefront 4 warp cores out of 5. When I tune in a bit as we take a look at the conclusion of this story, Paradise Lost. So, until then, live long and prosper, everybody.